Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Tammy Klein. Tammy is the Chief Executive Officer of Transport Energy Strategies, a consultancy working hard in the decarbonisation of transport. Welcome, Tammy.
Hi, Ned. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
Great to be here. We obviously have known each other for nearly 20 years. It was back in the day when we were doing my big biofuels congress, and you were heavily involved in that area, and I obviously stayed involved in that area, and one of the leading sort of subject matter experts around this space. Obviously, lots happening. You're speaking at the forthcoming World Hydrogen North America Congress. You've actually got a masterclass looking at hydrogen and setting it within the context of other options for decarbonisation of the transport sector. So maybe if we start there, I guess, and get your sort of big picture view. People are obviously seeing the rise of hydrogen, and clearly we've got a pretty mature or heavily maturing electrical drivetrain, and a lot of people are framing it as a technology race. We've got obviously Tesla and Elon Musk, who calls them fuel cells. Oh, sorry, fuel cells.
Fuel cells.
Fuel cells, yeah.
He also says biofuels for the record. So
okay, so here's those as well. So, yeah. So what are your thoughts, and what are you seeing, and how are you sort of framing this for your clients, and with the work that you're doing, and helping them, unpick this quite complex technology race, I guess.
Right. Well, there is a technology race, and it so happens that there's a lot of maturity that's beginning to happen with, like advanced biofuels, electrification, the scale up manufacturing of electric vehicles, consumer scale up, EV charging, and, novel fuels such as green hydrogen, such as e-fuels. So there really is kind of a race. And I think the assumption has been, well, as electrification scales up, well, the light duty fleet is kind of spoken for and it's done. And I'm not really sure that, that's the case. And then you can kind of see like the US government kind of has this, and this fuel will go here, and this fuel will go here. And
not only the US government, I think.
Yes, it's through the Department of Energy. And I'm referring to the blueprint for decarbonization, transport decarbonization, where you see the government kind of doing that, like, oh, we intend for low carbon fuels to be for sustainable aviation fuel, and electrification will be for the light duty fleet and maybe the heavy duty fleet, and and so on and so forth. And I think that the market is more complex than that. So I think that's the first thing, is there's no winner in the race yet. And so that may open up opportunities for hydrogen, especially as we begin to see the scale up. There's opportunities, I think, in both the light duty fleet and most especially in the heavy duty fleet. And I think the other thing is, that's really important after all these years of working in the space, which is now, coming up on 30, which I can't believe. I'm like,
you started work when you were 10.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I've aged well in a little hair color, and will never hurt anybody. But I think the other thing that's really important is, don't believe the silver bullet. So I think the field is wide open, and I think the next 10 to 20 years is going to be, really interesting. And I think part of what's driving that is not just the Inflation Reduction Act, but it is the rise of clean fuel standards that are, generally, technology neutral. So it's really, if you meet the carbon intensity targets or whatever, then you get to play in that space, and you can generate credits. So I think that's what's going to kind of keep the field, wide open, as well as the incentives under that act that really applies for all of these different fuels we're talking about. So it's an interesting space.
In terms of that, and just for people like myself who don't follow the transport regulation and the policy piece as closely as you do in the US, can the government or the federal government be accused of picking winners, or as you say, that there's definitely this flexibility? It's about the emissions intensity. So just, yeah, I'm a little bit confused as to which is it.
Well, to me, with the blueprint, where the government sort of laid out sort of like its roadmap or statement of how it views, fuels and transport energies for decarbonization, to me, it's a little bit of picking the winners.
Yeah.
Or picking the technologies for the different transport sectors, and I think that's not really. I've never seen that succeed. Let's put it that way. In whatever market, whether it's Europe or what have you, technology neutrality tends to work better, and people are coming up with technologies, and it's going to happen in the hydrogen space that we can't even really conceive of. It's like LanzaTech. It's like, they come up with this technology that's not really a bio-based fuel per se. I mean, it can be per se, but it's sort of like synthetic. And then it's like the regulations that were in place here didn't really kind of help, in the early years to sort of foster that. So we don't really want a situation like that to occur. So in the one hand, you see that with the blueprint. On the other hand, if you look at the IRA, there's really scope for all, there's incentives for all of these different fuel types to play, although I would say there is some prescriptiveness about, let's say some of the lower carbon fuel credits and how you can kind of take them. So in other words, there's a big preference right now for like green hydrogen. You can take the green hydrogen tax credit, and you can potentially also take the clean energy tax credit. So I guess there's a little bit of preferentiality there, but there's incentives for other fuel types as well.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of fuel types, there's obviously fuel types and there's infrastructure. You've got any comments around the sort of supporting of the infrastructure? I know in California, that they had some subsidized rollouts of hydrogen refueling stations, and specifically, is there some other states that are doing that, and are there subsidies available for high-powered, electric chargers for trucks or light trucks or whatever?
Yeah.
On that side.
Yeah, so there is. I mean, there is a lot more of a preference, I would say, for heavy-duty electrification, especially in states like California. But California has also done a lot on hydrogen refueling, and in the past, incentive programs, I think we're beginning to see a little bit of a breakout. And what I mean by that is that in the past, states, and even to some extent the federal government, would sort of like lump in hydrogen. It's like if we do alternative fueling, hydrogen can play in that, but there's nothing specific, to support the sort of the special needs and development for hydrogen refueling. So when you lump hydrogen in together, it's like, okay, well, that isn't really helping. Now what we're beginning to see at both the state and the federal level is support that is specific for hydrogen. So one thing that I'm seeing is more and more states, especially in the Northeast, that are going to do zero emission vehicle standards and follow California, and also California, so the West Coast, really getting more serious about, specific incentives to support the infrastructure scale up for hydrogen refueling and just hydrogen in general. So it's seen as much more of a strategic objective, and that it hasn't really helped the fuel to sort of create one sort of like alternative fuel incentive in which hydrogen can play a role, which doesn't help hydrogen, rather than, designing something that's really specific to the fuel itself. So that change has come about in the last few years, and it's been, and I think we will continue to see that trend play out. Like, I think hydrogen is becoming much more of a strategic priority for mobility and just across the board.
In terms of the OEMs in the truck sector, know from the European side, and we've seen, Daimler and some of the others, very favorable. They see, three zero emission platforms. Two are going up in scale. So the first two, the lighter and the medium, are obviously electric, but then the heavy is going to be hydrogen, and potentially different approaches from other different sort of truck manufacturers in the US. The main sort of truck manufacturers, are they investing R&D dollars into fuel cells and EV, or what's happening on the supply vehicle side?
Yes, definitely. And the one that really comes to my mind, who has done, or that has done a lot on this, is probably Cummins, and also the concept of not just the on the fuel cell side, and Toyota for sure. It's not just the fuel cell, but also developing the hydrogen internal combustion engine vehicle. And so, I mean, and this is a case where it's like, well, is this a zero emission vehicle? Is this going to sort of fit? Is this, so, and there's kind of question marks there, but yeah, some of the companies are really doing a lot in both of those areas: fuel cell electric vehicles, and also hydrogen ICEs. And one thing that I noticed recently, I did some research to actually see what the OEMs are doing, and it's actually astonishing. Like one example is General Motors. They have a very big EV commitment. Like they have bet the whole show, so to speak. Yeah, the big burrito, if you will. This event's going to be in Texas, right?
Yeah.
They bet the whole show on electric vehicles. But if you dig into their sustainability reporting, and their reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission, where you can find all kinds of interesting stuff, they're doing a lot on hydrogen also. And they're not just targeting the light duty market. They're going after medium duty, they're going after heavy duty, they're going after shipping, they're going after aviation. And it's, they want to develop hydrogen because it's about, market share and opening up new markets.
Shipping and that's definitely.
I mean, that would be like, GM and aviation, seriously.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, that's what they're doing. And when you start going down the list of OEMs who have a strong market presence here, most of them are doing a lot on light duty. Some of them are doing medium and heavy duty. The only one that's really not doing a whole lot in the area is Volkswagen, which doesn't have as much market share here in the US right now. And, they're really supporting the hydrogen-derived e-fuels. So e-fuels is sort of the big thing for them. So almost every OEM is doing something on hydrogen. And I think that's surprising for folks to hear, given all of the media blitz and stated commitments on electric vehicles. They're doing everything, basically.
But yeah, I recall Volkswagen being in trouble. I think they were help funding some of the infrastructure, aren't they?
Yes. So that is, and I think that's part of it is, they've also bet the show on electric vehicles, definitely in this country, and for sure. And yes, through the Dieselgate settlement, monies, really, if it, I often joke that, the EV scale up, you can thank Volkswagen for that, because that's a lot of what that $20 billion settlement was about. It was a settlement to the states to develop electric vehicle infrastructure, and it was it created Electrify America, which is becoming one of the largest EV charging companies in the country.
Yeah.
Thanks, Volkswagen.
Yeah, Elon sending them a Christmas card. In terms of I guess biofuels, our old subject matter, and recalling particularly the politics of biofuels and the value of those states in when it comes to election time. What are some of the thoughts on biofuels? You mentioned some of the second generation stuff sort of maturing, and there was this huge, obviously, wave of innovation back in 2007 to 12 around cellulosic ethanol and trying to use all of the biomatter and convert it from carbohydrates to hydrocarbons. And what are there any of those sort of technologies that are potentially getting close to sort of commercialization or competitive commercialization? And or how do you think the biofuel story is going to play out? People have been saying, well, biofuels shouldn't be going into road transport, it should be used for SAF, for airplanes. What are your thoughts around the sort of biofuel sector, and how do you see that sort of coexisting, I guess, with hydrogen? And there are also people talking about, I don't know if you've come across the term power biomass to liquids as well. But
so I think that, honestly, I think what some policymakers, both at the federal level and then maybe like Northeast and the West Coast, would like to see is a total turn away from biofuels in the light, medium, and heavy duty fleets. And instead, yes, let's just electrify everything. And I think that that's a mistake, because, obviously we're going to see a rise in electrification, especially in the light duty fleet. That's happening. That's already happening. But I mean, I guess I go back to, what is our goal? If our goal is, to reduce and get immediate greenhouse gas emission reduction, then we shouldn't turn away from biofuels. We need to do things in parallel. We're going to have a large legacy fleet, both in all the on-road modes, light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. And we need to find a way to reduce, carbon greenhouse gas emissions from those vehicles. And I think low carbon fuels can do that. And, I think we also tend to think, or these folks tend to think, that of biofuels as something as static in time. And, the studies have shown again and again, process improves, carbon intensity improves, intensity of farming and other sorts of metrics, improve. These fuels are getting lower and lower and lower carbon. There are ethanols out there, corn-based ethanols out there, that could, with the right sort of suite of technologies like carbon capture and storage, reach, net zero, or even net negativity. So, we have other sorts of pathways like, renewable diesel. We have, renewable natural gas, which can be, or biomethane, which can be net negative. And yes, there are, technologies. So yeah, there was lots of hype in that 2007, 2010 period. And then there was like an utter valley of death, development death that happened. And now what you're beginning to see is these companies beginning to, to come out of that valley of death and begin to commercialize. One of them is Velocis, which has sort of a, gasification, based technology. There are other examples as well. Interchem, technologies that are using, the circular economy, plastic wastes, woody biomasses, producing very low carbon fuels, not just for sustainable aviation fuel, but also for the on-road market. So, I think that it's a mistake to, again, apportion out markets. Set the ground rules for greenhouse gas emission reduction. That should be our focus, and then let the market sort of play out here is sort of my thinking. Policymakers haven't really done a good job here of doing that. So I think these fuels will be helpful as bridge fuels. And again, I think what they miss, like one example is sustainable aviation fuel. You need a lot of hydrogen to produce sustainable aviation fuel. Refiners and producers, SAF producers, what if they, and I know some are planning to do this, like incorporate green hydrogen into, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So refining usage of hydrogen, as you know, is one of the largest single uses of hydrogen in the world. And that's going to increase because of assuming low carbon fuels increase, renewable diesels and SAF. So, you're helping in concert to drive the market, and I don't think that policymakers necessarily think about those two together. Like everything is integrated.
Yeah.
And that's a good example of how hydrogen and SAF as a bio-based fuel are and can be integrated. We want to encourage that, not apportion and sort of cut things up, so to speak.
Great. Excellent. I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot to discuss. And
Yeah.
So I guess one final question is around, I guess, the end users and fleets. And, are you seeing momentum? I'm assuming that Amazon are, moving everything, via sort of zero emission vehicles, and are there people following? What's sort of happening, I guess, from a end user standpoint, specifically, corporates that are looking at their emissions profile?
Yes, it's becoming very, very important. So environment, social governance, all of the rules of the road, so to speak, haven't been established, but it's very important for those big users, end users like Amazon, like FedEx, like UPS and DHL and others on that side of things to really get a handle on emissions. And they are experimenting with technology. So, many have experimented with electric vehicles with varying degrees of success. And I think that there is interest in, especially as we begin to see, there's been a lot of experimentation like in California, but, as hydrogen really begins to scale up, I think they'll be interested in, and already are in, hydrogen fuel cells and hydrogen ICEs, as well to reduce their emissions profile. And in a way, it makes a lot more sense. There's ways to do the infrastructure for like long haul trucking. Like you don't have to have like I think the US has like 150,000 gas stations. We don't need that for long haul hydrogen trucking. We just need strategic infrastructure development, and that can bring costs down and make this as an option very palatable for more long haul trucking, just as one example. But yeah, I think there's lots of interest in the space, and the pressure to meet net zero targets and the scrutiny here in the US is increasing. I think it's been, as you very well know, in Europe for years. Now in the US, there's lots of attention on it, and it's really critical and strategically important to these companies to find and incorporate solutions. Shareholders are asking, environmentalists are asking, and kind of no one wants another engine number one issue, which is something that, sort of the shareholder rebellion that happened at Exxon. No one really wants that. And there are many people in these companies that are also very committed to, doing something on climate and doing their part. So I think hydrogen is going to be probably an increasing part of their portfolios, if I had to guess, down the line.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Every time you mention hydrogen and those truck stops, I have an image of sort of Clint Eastwood smoking a cigar and the safety aspects. But anyway,
those have yet to be worked out, but I think that they will. They're doing it for charging, and I think they'll do it for refueling as well. And they'll build on the experience in California to do that.
Excellent. As I said, you're going to be unpicking a lot of these issues in your masterclass, which is on the afternoon of 15th of May at the Marriott Marquis in Houston. Shortly before, I think, will be the welcome reception for the whole event. We'll have General Wes Clark giving his sort of keynote speech on the geopolitics of energy. So it's going to be an interesting couple of hours. So looking forward to it, and thank you very much for taking the time out to unpick some of these thoughts. It's been fascinating, as it was always, to catch up with you, Tammy. And I look forward to seeing you in happy Texas, Houston, for some Texas-sized beers. I think they make you drink there.
And Texas-sized food, so make sure you wear your pants.
Yeah, exactly. All right, take care.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, bye-bye.